Welcome in to the PFF Podcast. Steve Palazzolo and Sam Monson coming to you this week. Last week we just wrapped up the History of PFF Podcast. We think that's a great series that you guys should check out. We topped it with the boss, Chris Collinsworth, and wrapped a little bow on it. Had a nice little finale with Chris going through his thought process when he invested in PFF and everything we're looking to do in the future. So highly recommend you not only listening to last week's episode with Chris, but of course the entire History of PFF series. We had a lot of fun rehashing the past and learned a lot along the way. Football, business, all sorts of fun stuff. Before we get into it, don't forget, we're running another contest. We're giving away PFF's number one product, PFF Elite, a $200 value award-winning fantasy football analysis. We've got our player grades. We have signature stats, which are back after a 2 to 3 year hiatus. And we're going to have some draft stuff, a little 2018 draft guide, all included with PFF Elite. And if you want a chance to win a free $200 value Elite product, all you have to do is leave a 5-star review and you'll be in the running. We'll pull a hat or pull a name out of the hat. All you have to do is leave a 5-star review on iTunes, leave your Twitter handle or email address, and you'll be in the running to win a free PFF Elite. Find out more about Elite and Edge, our other product, which is only of $40 value. And, it's more than $40 value, but only $40. And you'll find that at profootballfocus.com/subscriptions. Today's episode, we're just trying to have some fun during the off season, give you guys some insight, give you guys a little peek behind the curtain at PFF and some of the things, the way we come about our grades. Of course, we went through the whole history. So today with Sam here, we're going to talk a little bit about guys from 2016 whose maybe their grade and public perception don't match up, and try to give a little bit of insight why that is. Sam, we've dealt with this through the years. You know, a lot of people follow PFF and say, well, why is this guy graded like this? I just watched the game. I got to trust my eyes. He looks better. What about these stats? We always deal with a lot of feedback, we'll call it, when we put our grades out there. So this is our chance to kind of explain, hey, this guy had 10 sacks, but here's why maybe his grade wasn't as good as you think.
Yeah, I think it's an area that's always good to keep coming back to try and explain exactly why we see things slightly differently and why the number is different than you might expect it. And rather than just us, ramming a number down your throats and expecting you to take our word for it, let's try and look at some case studies. Let's try and point to the reasons behind these numbers and explain why the grade is often different than some of these box score stats or even advanced numbers might lead you to think it should be.
The example I used continually during the History of PFF podcast, one of the reasons why I started to really enjoy PFF was back in 2010, before I worked for the company and was merely a fan. The game I always remember was Brandon Spikes had 3 tackles, Gerard Mayo had over 10, whatever it was, and PFF had Brandon Spikes graded higher. They're both inside linebackers. They're both, in theory, playing the same role, but the point was Brandon Spikes was beating blocks and blowing guys up and actually making life easier for Mayo. And I just loved that insight and perspective. It was one of the things that made me pretty much want to join PFF and be a part of it. So hopefully we could bring some of that kind of insight into this discussion. So let's just run through a few guys last year. I know we have a list of guys that I think maybe perception's a little bit different from where we have them graded. Let's start with a couple quarterbacks: Marcus Mariota, Eli Manning. If you do want to hear more on Marcus Mariota or Eli Manning, the Big Time Throwcast, there's my quick plug on that. Check out the Big Time Throwcast on your favorite provider, your favorite podcast provider. Zach Robinson and I give about 20 to 30 minutes on every NFL quarterback, and the archive there does have a Marcus Mariota episode and an Eli Manning episode. We get into some serious details there, but let's start with Mariota, Sam. I think there's a big part of his game that's, really evolved, and I do think he's got a lot to like about him, but grade-wise, not as high maybe as perception would have him, not as high as maybe the stats would show. Anything in particular about Mariota's game where it's just like, all right, hold the phone a little bit, maybe he's not as good as everybody thinks or as good as the stats might show?
I still can't believe that podcast is called the Big Time Throwcast. Like, that's whatever.
How is that not That's PFF at its heart, the big time throw.
It's PFF at its heart in terms of being terrible at naming things.
Okay, we don't have a great history of naming stuff. I want to hear everybody's feedback, though. Do you like the Big Time Throwcast? Is it so ridiculous that you would never listen to it? I just want to get the people in, and if that's not going to cut it.
If it's so ridiculous that you would never listen to it, please give us a better title for it so that we don't have to rely on Steve naming things again.
The Big Time Throwcast. I mean, I love the Big Time Throw. That's what we're all about here.
I know you do. But let's
anyway,
go back to
Mariota was a 72.4, just 72.4 overall last year, 24th among quarterbacks. Why is that?
So I think Mariota has the big time throw to him. You know, I think he's added that, or at least developed that part of his game. He makes some pretty big throws, some deep down the field stuff, some high graded stuff for us. But there's a lot of bad to his game that didn't necessarily show up in the box score stats. You know, you look last year, 9 interceptions. Even when you look under pressure, only 2 of those picks came when he was pressured. But, you know, if you go into those advanced stats or you go into those grades and you say that if you look at the turnover-worthy throws, his percentage was pretty high. It was that top 10, just up there with Brock Osweiler, or just behind Brock Osweiler. Sandwich between Osweiler and Trevor Siemian was where Mariota was last year. So that's not good company to be in when you're talking about the number of dangerous throws, essentially, you're putting the ball in the air with. When he was pressured, his completion percentage tumbled to 41.1%. You know, the production generally disappeared off a cliff. Now, you know, some quarterbacks make up some of that in terms of rushing and taking off in scrambles, and Mariota did, but 177 total scramble yards is not a huge amount. Scored 1 touchdown. Sorry, didn't score a touchdown doing that, but did fumble the ball. So it's not like he's a guy like Tyrod Taylor who is offsetting a huge amount of passing yards with plays with his legs, taking off, scrambling, and adding a significant amount of yardage to the table. He's added some, but I don't think it makes up for the passing numbers that he had when he was pressured, just driving off a cliff.
Yeah, and in the perception with Mariota is that he is this dual threat type of quarterback, and like you said, I think he did take a step back in that department last year. The other part of it, the fumbles. You mentioned one while rushing. There were other fumbles in the pocket that will not show up in passer rating. And we try to separate those fumbles. There are some where the quarterback just doesn't have a shot, right? You know, The left tackle gets whooped and he's in the throwing motion and there's just no way he can avoid the fumble. But Mariota, dating back to his Oregon days, he's had some ball security issues. So when he's either trying to make a play outside the pocket, he will fumble, or when he has a chance to keep both hands on the ball, he will fumble. And those are ones we'll be a little bit more harsh on in the grades. And of course, that's not going to show up in passer rating.
Those are the other hidden statistics. I mean, fumbles for quarterbacks just get ignored, essentially. I mean, will occasionally get brought up if a guy has had a ridiculous number of them, but otherwise, you can have a bunch of those and essentially skate by entirely unknown. Now, you know, we have to put them somewhere. We're going to downgrade a guy for bad ball security in the pocket, putting the ball on the ground. You know, as everybody who likes football statistics knows, turnovers are like the single biggest indicative statistic you could possibly have. And if you've got a guy that is consistently unaware enough in the pocket that he's letting the ball get swatted out of his hand on a consistent basis, you know, from guys where he knows it's coming or guys where he should know it's coming, you know, as distinct from those ones you talked about, the kind of Dwight Freeney, Robert Mathis strip sack as he's in the throwing motion, those are bad plays that need to be accounted for somewhere, but they're not going to show up in your box score. They're not going to show up in most advanced statistics either.
Right, exactly. So that's something that we definitely try to account for on a play-to-play basis. Like you said, taking care of the football is so important. One of the things I found interesting, and you could get the exact numbers in the Big Time Throwcast episode, Mariota was not good outside the pocket throwing the ball either. So a guy that is supposed to be able to create big plays outside of structure just didn't do a whole lot of that. I think it's part of his game that if he does improve, though, he's a dangerous player. I don't think the stats completely lie. I mean, he did do a lot of good things, but then there's also a handful of passes. Do you remember was it the New Orleans pass that he kind of just threw up? Was it New Orleans last year? maybe it was or maybe that was 2 years ago. There was some kind of pass he just kind of threw up and landed in Delanie Walker's hands for like an 80-yard touchdown, and we were like, "Hey, come on!"
Yeah, it should have been. Did it bounce off a guy? I remember the one you're talking about. Yeah,
that might have been 2 years ago though, but the same thing was true 2 years ago. He had week 1, he had 4 touchdowns. I think you wrote an article the day after saying, "All right, let's back up, take a step back here. We're talking about beautifully schemed up passes." That went for touchdowns. They were like pretty standard throws.
It was the same play every time. They ran or faked an inside zone pass and then hit a slant underneath it that was wide open because a linebacker jumped up on the run.
Right.
It's like the same pass accounted for most of those plays.
So we're just trying to add some context and perspective. And just to add, just not to pile on to Mariota, but to kind of wrap it up, he did have 2 games last year. If you were just using the stats against Denver, 6 for 20 for 80 yards, for 88 yards in a game that they won, 8 for 20 against Jacksonville in the game that he got hurt. I mean, there were some poor games in there. So I think he started slow last year. He had a middle of the season throwing the ball where he was excellent. I think he does some really good stuff in the red zone, from no-look passes to, just taking care of the ball in general there, but maybe not as good as his career 93.8 passer rating might indicate. So Mariota, a guy, I still think he has a bright future.
Can't believe you brought up the Denver game. QB wins. He won that game. What's your problem?
He did win it with his 8 for 20. Let's talk some Eli Manning here because I think you love talking about Eli Manning and trashing him. His season last year, again, stats are actually tough. Just to put passer ratings, just like this good way of gauging what perception might be. So if you said, hey, Eli Manning had an 86 passer rating in the regular season, historically that's pretty good. It was 24th in the NFL last year. There were 20 guys that were 90 or above in passer rating. So 90 used to be a gold standard. Now you've got 2/3 of NFL quarterbacks, or almost half of qualifying NFL quarterbacks, more than half, at 90 plus, which is really absurd. So Eli even statistically wasn't great, 6.7 yards per attempt. We had him even lower than that because those 6.7 yards per attempt, how many of those were the 2-yard slant to Odell Beckham, who just outran the defense and just padded Eli's stats? He was not nearly as good as even that 86 passer rating would indicate last season.
Yeah, Odell Beckham, 500 yards after the catch last season, 29 broken tackles after the catch, led all wide receivers, I think. And that's a pretty ridiculous number. That's a kind of
that is crazy
Percy Harvin-esque number when he was playing, basically everything he did was after the catch. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like you say, Eli Manning's numbers on the face of it actually look pretty good. And then when you think about it a bit more, they're really not. Like you said, the game has moved on. It's changed. And like you say, an 86 passer rating used to be pretty good. Now it's below average. And that's kind of the bottom line with almost all of Eli Manning's numbers. They look good when you're thinking about long-term numbers, but actually in the NFL of 2016, they're not great. And there's a lot of bad stuff in there. And that's before you get into the idea that those numbers might be inflated by that offense that, exists in 11 personnel and operates a lot after the catch and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, Eli Manning, it's interesting. We wrote a news ticker piece recently on him, and the graphic that went along with it was Eli Manning's just his grade over the past few seasons, starting from that 2011 season, which is one of the best performances under pressure I have ever seen consistently.
He was incredible. He was absolutely incredible that season from start to finish.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, a phenomenal season, the best year of his career by a distance. And since that, it's been an almost perpetual steady decline downhill. The next year was a significant step back. The year after that was another big step down. Then he kind of hovered around the same level. And then last year, in terms of grading, took another big step downwards. And I've brought it up a few times now that Eli Manning is at the age where quarterbacks used to decline and retire. And I don't know if that is what he is, if he's going to be a guy that just kind of hits that wall sooner than other guys. But I think it's a very real concern that Eli Manning is reaching the point of being done. And there's just so many bad plays in there. I mean, he's always been a guy that makes more poor decisions than many quarterbacks.
Sixth highest percentage of turnover-worthy plays last year. We had him with 33. So that includes some fumbles in there too, but 33 passes essentially that should be turnovers. And for perspective, and that's including the playoff game, in the playoffs as well, but 33 turnover-worthy plays and 17 interceptions. So we're talking about a guy that had 17. It's still a pretty high number, but should have been at least in that 24-25 interception range, which of course changes the stats dramatically.
Also, here's the biggest contextualizer. That's not a word, but you know what I mean. Here's the biggest.
Is now.
Yeah, there you go. Here's the biggest contextualizer to that statistic. The guy that is one space better than Eli Manning is Ryan Fitzpatrick. So Eli Manning had a greater percentage of turnover-worthy throws last season than Ryan Fitzpatrick did. And Ryan Fitzpatrick was basically blindfold just heaving the ball downfield last year as if, it didn't matter where it went. So that's the kind of level, that's the frequency with which Eli Manning is putting ill-advised passes in the air, despite an offense that is extremely quarterback-friendly in terms of short, horizontal stuff that's not asking him to go deep down the field. His average depth of target was 8.3, which is marginally higher than Cody Kessler, who is renowned as a guy who was just dinking and dunking all season. So,
you'll take any chance to tell people how good Kessler is.
Well, I'm not. Look, Kessler's 29th and Eli Manning is 24th. But I see Kessler's down there at 8 yards per attempt. Eli Manning's at 8.3. He is at the dink and dunk end of the offensive spectrum when it comes to average depth of target, and despite that, he is one of the highest turnover-worthy play proponents in the entire league.
So Eli finished 27th in our PFF grades last year, just above Blake Bortles. I know it sounds harsh, but I think we've laid out the case. Got lucky on the interceptions, got lucky with yards after the catch. For the most part, a lot of short passes. Now, there were some games he showed signs and he was fine, but there were some disastrous games too. That Dallas game, probably one of the worst quarterback games on both sides, and I think that might be surprising because Dak had such a good season, but him and Dak were both trying to lose that game. Sunday Night Football, back and forth. Eli threw so many passes into coverage that night, but got lucky there, and they got the win. So they got that QB win
there you go.
That night as well, I believe, if I remember correctly. But yeah, so the other part of this whole Eli thing, we've used some numbers, but just the eye test, Sam, he's got this. We've seen other Mannings lose their arm strength later in their career, and I know Peyton had injury issues that may have caused it, but Eli's arm certainly did not look great. He's a guy that used to be able to, with great timing, accuracy, and zip, drive the ball outside the numbers. You just did not see that last season. I think that's part of the reason that it's such a shorter pass game for the Giants. I'll be interested to see this year now that they've added Evan Ingram in the first round, Sterling Shepard, who we loved coming out of college and was pretty good as a rookie as well, Odell Beckham, and of course they had Brandon Marshall as well. So I think, we might have another year where Eli gets elevated by his playmakers, by the guys around him. Throw jump balls up to Brandon Marshall. Let Odell Beckham work after the catch. Sterling Shepard's going to find himself open quite a bit. Evan Ingram, a potential mismatch guy. We might see another pretty good, or we might see a good statistical season for Eli, even though his play might be declining. The Giants are doing everything they can to surround him with good talent, at least at the playmakers. We'll talk about the offensive line. It's a different story, though.
That's where I was going to go next. I'm just trying to think of the excuses that the Eli apologists tend to trot out when the Eli Manning thing comes up. And one thing that's definitely worthy of discussion is the offensive tackles. I mean, how much of Eli's bad play can possibly be put down to having two revolving doors at left and right tackle?
It's a factor. It's definitely a factor. I mean, it's not the difference between him being a top 10 quarterback and 25th, but maybe the difference between 25th and 18th or 19th. So that's fair a little bit. It's also fair to say that his arms, losing zip, and he still makes a ton of bad decisions. And that's not really something that has changed throughout his career. He's always been a guy that puts the ball in harm's way.
Well, that's the thing, is it's not so much the bad plays under pressure, because obviously that's where you would go mentally with that is, well, if he's making bad decisions and he's constantly under pressure, that's not really his fault, or at least partially not his fault. But
right.
so many of his bad plays are not under pressure at all. 12 of his interceptions last year were under no pressure whatsoever. That's bad. I mean, most quarterbacks. I mean, Tom Brady had 3 turnover-worthy plays all season long?
All season. And last year was like, if you're just looking at interception totals, last year was like an historic season as far as avoiding interceptions. It was not only Brady, but a bunch of quarterbacks had ridiculously low interception numbers. And I believe the league as a whole maybe had the lowest interception percentage in history by a wide margin. So we're talking about the league becoming easier for quarterbacks, safer for quarterbacks, and Eli's still finding a way to turn the ball over or at least put the ball in harm's way.
Yeah, I mean, Andrew Luck might be a good comparison because Andrew Luck had, 13 interceptions last season, which is not an insignificant total, but only 4 of them came when he was kept clean. So, he is a guy who you could say, well, the pressure is causing Andrew Luck to make some bad decisions. But Eli Manning, 3 times the number of interceptions when he was kept clean in the pocket. So I don't think that's an excuse for him. So come out and join me on this limb. Is Eli Manning done, or is this, are we going to see some kind of resurgence from him?
So the reason why I don't think he's done is because I know what guys are capable of in today's NFL. And as much as we trash that decision making, I feel like it's still if you throw 30 turnover worthy plays in a season, the difference between getting from 30 to maybe 20, I don't think is that difficult if you really put your mind to it as a quarterback and you're a veteran. So I think I wouldn't be surprised if Eli goes out there, was able to change his game a little bit, really rely on that supporting cast. We saw Brandon Marshall and Eric Decker and some guys carry Ryan Fitzpatrick 2 years ago.
Yeah.
I could see Eli get carried by Marshall, Odell Beckham, Sterling Shepard, Evan Ingram. Those guys can create some big plays. So I would not be surprised to see a reasonable statistical season for Eli Manning, even if his physical tools are dwindling. I just think that's today's NFL. You can kind of mask it. Now, if you're talking about him and his skill set and all that stuff, I mean, yeah, it's close to done. I think we're 2 to 3 years away. There's only so much that you can hide him and elevate him by his playmakers.
There we go. That's close. I'll take that. That's close enough.
That's where I am. All right, we have a big list of guys to go through. We don't need to hit up each one. I thought the quarterbacks are certainly the most interesting, but anybody on this list, Lawrence Timmons, I think is an interesting name. There's a couple defensive tackles. Give me the next one you want to discuss, Sam.
I like Timmons. Let's do Timmons. That's an interesting name because he's a guy that's been all over the map in his PFF career. At one point, he was our highest graded linebacker in the entire league. I don't know what year that was, back in 2010 maybe. He had a fantastic season and was legitimately the best linebacker in the league. He then followed that up with a pretty bad year. Like, he went from best linebacker in the league to getting no kind of pressure despite being blitzed heavily.
Well, I think 2011 he may have gotten screwed a little bit. I think that might have been the year he had to fill in on the edge for James Harrison and play more of a true edge role. So yeah, the grade didn't look great, but I think he was playing out. He was playing out of position for a little bit.
Yeah, but even before that, he kind of bounced up and down, and it was the
run defense wasn't as good that year.
The 2010 season was almost like a bolt from the blue. We saw some legit elite potential from regress the next year, kind of bounced back again in 2012, and then never really got back to that level. And the last couple of years, he has just looked like a shadow of that guy. Despite, I will say, being put in a scheme that asks a ridiculous amount of its linebackers on occasions. Like, there are certain plays where you see the things those guys are being asked to do, and you just think, I mean, that's just mean. Like, the linebacker's never making that play.
Yeah, the last 2 years I just thought he looked old. And I don't know if he was playing banged up or if age just hit him. So many times exploited in coverage. 23 missed tackles in 2015, which was a career high. And a lot of missed tackles the last 2 years. And then he only down to 17 missed tackles last year, but still just a step slow in everything he did. I think Pittsburgh saw that as well. And Pittsburgh's done a nice job of like trying to get more speed on that defense. They've never been known as a speedy type of defense. They're trying to get a little bit quicker. And when you see Ryan Shazier, even though Shazier's not a great player, you see him flying around the field, and you see Timmons not so much. I mean, it was pretty noticeable the last couple of years.
And I think that defense It'd be interesting to see what he does this year because, like I say, not only does the Pittsburgh defense kind of ask a lot of its linebackers, but the technique they play with, I think, makes them look worse when they start to lose something. So I think you see it they basically expect you to almost play man within zone, which is fine, but it kind of takes you out of position for the secondary threat. So you'll see a lot where there's linebackers drop into a zone, they get to the landmarks, then they start moving to cover the first threat into that zone. But if the play lasts long enough, they then have to peel back off and go to somebody else. And the problem is, if you're a guy like Shazier, you cover so much ground on that first guy that you're way out of position for the second guy. And if you're a guy like Timmons, you're just too slow to get back to the second guy. So you've moved yourself out of position. You just have way too much ground to cover for the second guy. So I think for different reasons, the scheme kind of makes those two guys look a little bit worse on occasions than they actually are. So it's going to be interesting to see with him in Miami now, I think, whether that kind of reverses itself, whether a more beneficial or linebacker-friendly scheme makes him look a little bit better again.
Got to hand it to Timmons as far as not coming off the field. He's played over 1,000 snaps every year since 2010. Last year, 1,145 snaps. That is incredible. We're talking about most years he's playing 98, 99% of the snaps. Last year was 92%. And yeah, going to Miami, I wonder, we kind of saw this with James Laurinaitis too. Laurinaitis' play, he was never a great player, but his play really dropped off his last couple seasons. And he was the guy that never, ever came off the field, went to New Orleans, and just it wasn't right last year either. But I remember thinking the only way you're going to get something out of him is to just make him a part-time player, just use him. He's a pretty good coverage player. I feel like Timmons is the guy that maybe you can get something on early downs against the run, but expecting a lot of him in coverage at this point might be the wrong way to go. But maybe it's just a matter of cutting down on his snaps and saying, look, you're just not a 3-down linebacker at this point in your career.
Yeah, that's entirely possible. I think he's got the kind of physical ability to play tough against the run and not, if you remove him from those kind of really tough plays in space, you might be able to get some more out of him.
Yeah, I agree. Let's talk defensive tackles now. We got Johnathan Hankins and Dontari Poe, two guys, fairly big names, especially Poe, but neither guy graded well last year. Let's start with Poe, actually. He's going to Atlanta now, coming out of Kansas City, where they were more of a classic 3-4 for a lot of his time there. He played a traditional nose tackle role, and I always thought he was a fascinating player because he was that athletic freak who maybe didn't have great college production, and showed there were times in his career where he looked really good. He had his technique down, playing the run really well. He'd show flashes rushing the passer, but he was very inconsistent. He was not the dominant player that you expect. You had a lot of comparisons to Haloti Ngata coming out as that 350-pound player that could run fast and super athletic guy. So what are your thoughts on Poe and expectations going into Atlanta?
Yeah, big name, big boy. He's the archetypal example of Bill Parcells' The World Theory. A guy where you take this guy when you have a shot at him because there just aren't that many people like him walking around this planet, walking the world at the moment. Not
because he's the size of a planet? Is that what the planet theory really is?
Maybe too, yeah. But, like you say, he's a 345-pound guy that can move and not just run fast in a straight line, but he's athletic. He's got, movement skills. You look at him do those drills at the combine. This is a guy that kind of dance around like someone that weighs 100 pounds less than he does. It's weird. You shouldn't be able to do that at that weight. So, yeah, I think that's why you expect big things from him, because he has that kind of freakish athletic skills. And I think we did see for a while he kind of played up to that level against the run. And, the Chiefs for a long time ran that kind of more traditional two-gapping 3-4 where he is expected to anchor that nose. He is expected to deal with two gaps. He's expected to do a lot of stuff that most defensive tackles in the NFL aren't anymore. But I think he showed the ability to do that. And there were a couple of years in there where there were some really good seasons against the run. We never really saw anything as a pass rusher, but it'll be interesting to see. And I think he's kind of pitched that as his free agent tour this offseason that he just wasn't allowed to rush the passer there. You know, they expected him to basically maintain lane discipline, maintain gap discipline, make sure the quarterback doesn't escape up the middle of the pocket, and, you know, not sell out too much to try and actually pressure him. It'll be interesting to see if that's true or if that's just, you know, the free agent tour sales pitch, and put in a more aggressive defense, you still don't see anything as a pass rusher. If I was a betting man, I would suspect that the latter is true, and even liberated from those responsibilities, we're not going to see a huge amount of pressure come from Poe.
I mean, you will see an uptick, but it's not like Tyson Jackson was unleashed in Atlanta's scheme a couple of years ago and getting after the quarterback. I know it was a different system and all, but just to get some perspective, a lot of guys, we always talk about contract years. Last year of the contract, guy steps up, and Poe kind of went the opposite way. 2013 was an 86.4. 2014 is 76.9. 2015 a 78.2. This is from PFF Overall Player Grades, which you can find as part of PFF Edge and PFF Elite. We mentioned earlier today that you can win that free PFF Elite. Just leave us the 5-star review. But then 2016, he drops down, has the worst year since his rookie season overall. And like you said, it's not so much the pass rushing, the fact that he kind of took a step back against the run as that 350-pound supposed run-stopping nose tackle. That's a little bit alarming. So, we'll see if in more of this traditional, maybe like one tech nose tackle role, maybe they move him around a little bit in Atlanta, if he can rejuvenate his career.
Well, here's the thing. Can you imagine how annoyed you would be if you would sign Dontari Poe with the physical gifts that he has in terms of movement skills at that size, when you get to look how a guy like Damon Harrison plays week in, week out? You know, Dontari Poe is basically Damon Harrison with added movement skills. And Damon Harrison is a dramatically better run defender than Dontari Poe ever was. Even Dontari Poe at his best didn't come close to how good Damon Harrison has been consistently as a run defender. So, if you sign this guy or you drafted him in the first round, you're expecting the product of this planet theory to walk out on the field and just dominate the way Damon Harrison does. And it just doesn't happen. And then you get a guy like Damon Harrison, undrafted, comes in and he's the best run defending nose tackle in the NFL. It's just, the physical talent that Poe has, he should be a better player than he's been so far.
Yeah, any way that we could get in that Damon Harrison is so good against the run, so fun to watch, and we really haven't seen anyone dominate like him against the run the last few years. Got to get that into the podcast when we can. Also brings up the point, in such a pass-heavy NFL, as valuable, as good as Big Snacks is, do you ever want to take a guy like Dontari Poe or even a Big Snacks in the first round? Because, it's a pass-first league. You have to get after the quarterback. Let's talk Johnathan Hankins, another big guy that, has shown flashes throughout his career. Last year, not so great as far as PFF grades go. And it's another chance to talk about Big Snacks, kind of stealing his thunder, stealing his role, because I think Hankins, at 350 pounds or so, he's listed at 320. I think he's a lot bigger than that. He's the guy that really should be playing nose tackle, but they bring in Damon Harrison, who is your perfect nose tackle, pushes Hankins out to more of a 3-technique role, and he just does not play nearly as well against the run, and even as a pass rusher, was never really a great player. Had 6 sacks, but had a lot of opportunities to rush the passer and just did not get a ton of pressure.
Yeah, that's like the good and the bad of Damon Harrison all in one. I think the good, and the bad's not even his fault, really, but the good is that I think it is worth taking a guy like that in the first round if they're that good. Like, if you know you're going to get a Damon Harrison level player, I think it's absolutely worth a first round pick, just as it turns out it was worth the contract that they handed him. He signed a huge offseason free agent deal, and you thought, ooh, that's pretty rich for a guy that's basically a 2-down player. For exactly the reasons you were talking about. It's a pass-heavy league. What do you need a run defender for? But just the impact that he made visibly on that defense this year, you would instantly say, yeah, forget that. It's worth it. It doesn't matter that he's not going to generate a huge amount of pressure on pass rushing downs. He can be the 4th guy out there, or you can turn him into a 2-down player. His impact against the run is absolutely worth the big money contract that we have to pay him. And therefore, I think it translates that it's worth a first-round pick. The bad, at least last season, is that, he basically ruined Johnathan Hankins' season by making him have to play 3-tech, because Hankins just isn't that player. He is the guy that should have been playing nose tackle, but is just not as good a player as Damon Harrison. So to get both of them on the field, the Giants had him out there rushing the passer. And like you say, he racked up 6 sacks, but he was out there a huge amount of plays to get those sacks.
445 pass rushes, including the playoffs.
Oof.
And that is one of those things where a lot of times as fans, you just look at stats and you say, oh, he had 6 sacks. And then another guy had 6 sacks. And you don't even consider, well, one guy rushed the passer 445 times. Maybe another guy rushed the passer 250 times. To be honest, if you put a below average pass rusher out there in the NFL 445 times, I think most of them, we got to run these numbers, Sam, most of them will run into 6 sacks accidentally.
Just
the bigger issue is there was no other, but there was like no other pressure either. It was 2 QB hits, 18 hurries. So he essentially affects the quarterback 26 times on 445 rushes. Again, if you put the average or a below average interior pass rusher out there for 445 snaps, some guys are going to stumble into 10 sacks and 10 QB hits and 30 hurries and maybe not even be that great just because of all those opportunities.
So I think you almost throw out last season as a guy that was just playing out of position. It's not what he's supposed to be doing. It's not what he's good at. And it's not representative of him as a player. The problem he has is it's twofold. One, that he's only really got 2 seasons of fully healthy, full-time play, one of which was last season, which we're trying to throw out the window. And his second problem is that he's never, except for 1 year, he's never really brought anything as a pass rusher. But the 1 year that he did, it was actually quite good. He, in 2014, he had 8 sacks, but he also had 6 hits, 21 hurries, and 3 batted passes, if you want to throw those into the bargain as well. So he actually, from a kind of nose tackle position, did look like a guy that could get after the passer, or at least bring his part of the pressure equation from a defensive line. Now, admittedly, that was on a defensive line with Jason Pierre-Paul at the height of his play, with Mike Patterson, with Matthias Kiwanuka, with Robert Ayers still there, Cullen Jenkins. There were a lot of talented guys on that defensive line, so there was definitely guys to help him out. But, in 366 pass rushing snaps that year,
right, far fewer opportunities.
Generated a lot more total pressure and more sacks. So, but like I say, that's the 1 year of his career where he's basically been able to generate anything as a pass rusher. So you're left with this question of whether he can actually be a pass rushing component of your defensive line, or if he is just a 2-down nose tackle. And if he's just a 2-down nose tackle, he's nowhere near as good at it as Damon Harrison is. So then you do get into that discussion about whether it's worth it.
Well, nobody is as good as Damon Harrison, but Hankins moves on to the Indianapolis Colts, who need any type of big bodies up front. That's just what they need. I think Hankins could be a really nice fit for them. Early downs, stopping the run. I think there's a chance to kind of bounce back from last year. Let's go one more guy here, and along the same lines, talking pass rushing, well, this guy had 8 sacks. How could you not grade him well? And it's Yannick Ngakoue. I'm pretty sure that's the right pronunciation. Don't test me on this, Sam. Yannick Ngakoue. I got it. He had, was it 8 sacks last year? I'm sorry. I'm unprepared without the numbers in front of me. I just know Jaguars fans have been yelling at us about Ngakoue and how awesome he is. And 8 sacks, but still did not grade well. The bigger issue for him, and this was exactly in line with his college scouting report, he's not good against the run. And I'm okay with saying, the run doesn't matter. And we've been talking about that this entire show. But he's really bad against the run. I mean, he was really bad in college against the run and was really bad in his rookie season against the run, which is fine. Like, you got to know what you're getting into. He did come in with the 8 sacks, 6 QB hits, 33 hurries. Pretty good numbers, but then again, you put that in perspective. He had 474 pass rush opportunities. That's really a lot. And the difference, those, you can't let the 8 sacks skew things. It's about how those sacks come about, how quickly they come about. Are they cleanup pressures where cleanup sacks where someone else is doing the work. Ngakoue didn't grade well despite the 8 sacks.
It's true. But I think just looking at it, you bring up a good point, because the sacks thing we've talked about before can be completely misleading. You can get sacks where almost all of them are cleanup or pursuit, or the guy basically didn't need to do anything in order to get those sacks. They basically just fell into his lap. Ngakoue, his sacks are actually all legit. They were all came, except for one. There was one unblocked sack in there, but the rest of them all came from legit beats of, they were all offensive tackles as well. Beat Ryan Clady, beat Joe Barksdale, beat Ronnie Stanley, beat Anthony Costanzo, beat Riley Reif, beat Cordy Glenn. Some of those are pretty good players as well. His thing is what you said at the end of that is he rushed the passer 474 times, which is a lot. We were talking about Johnathan Hankins rushing at 450 or 425 or something. There weren't that many edge rushers that played 475 snaps, let alone rushed the passer 475 snaps. That's basically the same amount of playing time that Jarvis Jones had in Pittsburgh, period. Or it's more playing time than Rob Ninkovich had. This is a guy that was rushing the passer a lot. And he only had, 8 sacks is relatively respectable, but he only had 47 total pressures. So it's a case of, his numbers are relatively decent, the 8 sacks thing, but he was rushing the passer an incredible amount to generate that amount of pressure.
He was. So, his pass rush grade still ended up right around average, which is fine. Just going back to the run grade, in college, his last year at Maryland, we had him out of 383 edge defenders against the run. He was 364th. So you just that's what we expected. That's what we expected of him coming in. And then last year ranked dead last, 107th against the run at a 32.7 grade. So that would explain why he did not have a great overall grade. And again, if you want to say, hey, he was average rushing the passer, that's fine. I'll take that. It's more valuable. Even if you want to take that, it still wasn't like he was a dominant edge rusher, and certainly not as dominant as maybe the 8 sacks would play with your mind.
No, well, to put that into some context, Brandon Graham rushed the passer 5 fewer times over the regular season than Ngakoue did, and Brandon Graham gained 36 additional pressures. So Ngakoue got 2 more sacks than Graham, but Graham hit the quarterback 11 more times, knocked him to the ground 11 more times, and hurried him another 27 times. So, this is a guy who rushed the passer a lot, got a reasonable amount of pressure, but not a crazy amount of pressure. And on the flip side of that, was bad against the run.
And, we always talk about the value of pressure. Yes, a sack is extremely valuable, but the way you get there is important. How quickly you get there is important. And rushing the passer drops a passer rating from about 95 to the high 60s. You're turning Hall of Famer Drew Brees into
lower than that
rookie.
Last year.
Lower than that last year. So you're talking.
Do you want to see the top of my head? This is how encyclopedic my knowledge is.
Let's see it. Let's hear. What was it last year, Sam?
Last year, no pressure at all. Quarterbacks had a passer rating of 96.7, and when they were pressured, that dropped to 62.5.
62.5. So that just shows the value of actually pressuring the quarterback, even if you don't get home with a sack. Something we take very seriously in our PFF numbers and the grades. We appreciate everybody listening this week. We're trying to have a little bit of fun, give you guys some insight into the PFF grading. Give us your feedback. Hit us up on Twitter. I'm at PFF_Steve. Sam is at PFF_Sam. Give us some other topics and ideas. What do you want to hear? What insight do you want to hear about the PFF process? Again, trying to give you guys a little bit of a peek behind the curtain. And don't forget, you have a chance to get PFF Elite, our $200 valued product. You can do that by just leaving a 5-star review. Take 30 seconds out of your day. Say, Sam's awesome, Steve's awesome, Bike Renner's okay. Put a 5-star review there. Leave your Twitter handle or email address so that we can get in touch with you if you win. And you'll have a chance at that $200 product filled with our award-winning fantasy football stats and tools, a draft guide for 2018. We're getting way ahead of the game there. Our player grades that we've been using during this entire show. You'll have full access to those. And then our signature stats, things like quarterbacks playing under pressure, wide receiver deep ball numbers, cornerbacks covering the slot, stuff you literally cannot find anywhere else. $200 value, and you can get it for free. Just leave us the 5-star review. Don't forget your Twitter handle or email address. That'll do it for today. Please be sure to tune in every Monday and Friday for the PFF podcast. And Mike and Sam will be back with some more NFL news on Monday. Everybody have a great weekend.